Welcome to Matters Financial and Geopolitical from a Frontier, and I trust the week's gone well. I certainly enjoyed attending Ian Donald of Nestle's talk at ICRAF yesterday. He made many interesting points, said that handouts are not sustainable, and then this comment, which I liked: nutritional food at an affordable price is the challenge for today's world, he said. Home thoughts. Turn back to those two photographs I took of Kilimanjaro. Well, it was one photograph, but I coloured the second one differently. And I'm so pleased with that Samsung S5 phone. It really has a remarkable camera. And that took me back to Ernest Hemingway, who wrote In the Snows of Kilimanjaro. Kilimanjaro is a snow-covered mountain, 19,710 feet high, and is said to be the highest mountain in Africa. Its western summit is called the Masai-Ngaje-Ngai, the House of God. Close to the western summit there is a dried and frozen carcass of a leopard. No one has explained what the leopard was seeking at that altitude. Political reflections. The city of Mosul is outside the control of the state and at the mercy of the militants, said an Interior Ministry official. Mosul is the second city to be captured by rebels this year after the central government lost control of Fallujah. And it is as clear as day that the infection is spreading. The White House called on the Iraqi government to step up to the plate, and it made me go back to Odin Yinon's strategy for Israel in the 1980s. The Arab-Muslim world, therefore, is not the major strategic problem which we shall face in the 80s, despite the fact that it carries the main threat against Israel due to its growing military might. This world, with its ethnic minorities, its factions and internal crises, which is astonishingly self-destructive, as we can see in Lebanon, in non-Arab Iran, and now also in Syria, is unable to deal successfully with its fundamental problems, and does not therefore constitute a real threat against the state of Israel in the long run, but only in the short run, where its immediate military power has great import. In the long run, this world will be unable to exist within its present framework in the areas around us without having to go through genuine revolutionary changes. The Muslim Arab world is built like a temporary house of cards put together by foreigners, France and Britain in the 1920s, without the wishes and desires of the inhabitants having been taken into account. It was arbitrarily divided into 19 states, all made of combinations of minorities and ethnic groups which are hostile to one another, so that every Arab Muslim state nowadays faces ethnic social destruction from within, and in some a civil war is already raging. So clearly that was a very prescient piece, and it's interesting because this fragmentation and dissolution of which he spoke is actually happening in front of our eyes. Benghazi, Mosul, Syria, all most recent examples. The US Admiral Cecil Haney confirmed that the US Air Force had deployed 2 B-2 stealth bombers to Europe to conduct military exercises. This deployment of strategic bombers provides us an invaluable opportunity to strengthen and improve interoperability with our allies and partners. And that takes me back to the 2nd of December when I wrote that piece called The Pivot to Asia Bears Its Fangs, and I was talking about the imposition of the ADIZ by China. The US responded to the declaration of the ADIZ by flying 2 B-52s directly into it, and that message is kind of incontestable. Predicting that the US will continue to send flights through the area, Francois Godemont, Senior Policy Fellow at the European Council on Foreign Affairs, said, "What they are doing is dropping their business card." That note I'll put up that installation by Ai Weiwei called The Snake, which for me best symbolizes the policy of containment. International markets, the World Bank has cut global economic forecast. The bank expects the global economy to grow by 2.8%, compared with the 3.2% predicted in January. Developing country expansion has been revised down from 5.3 to 4.8%, while expansion in high-income countries has been shaved from 2.2 to 1.9%. After a sluggish start to 2014, the bank expects activity to accelerate during the rest of the year and for global growth to be 3.4% in 2015 and 3.5% in 2016. A stronger performance by the US and a slow recovery in the Eurozone are expected to help developing countries by acting as markets for their exports. This was an interesting comment. Markets remain skittish, and speculation over the timing and magnitude of future shifts in high-income macro policy may result in further episodes of volatility. Also, vulnerabilities persist in several countries that combine high inflation and current account deficits: Brazil, South Africa, and Turkey. The bank added that the budgets of developing countries had worsened significantly since the financial crisis in 2007. In almost half of developing countries, government deficits exceed 3% of GDP, while debt to GDP ratios have risen by more than 10 percentage points since 2007. And then a warning to, amongst others, Kenya. Fiscal policy needs to tighten in countries where deficits remain large, including Ghana, India, Kenya, Malaysia, and South Africa. The euro is soft at 135.30. Dollar index, top of the range, 80.84. Japanese yen, 102.26. Swissy, 0.9003. The pound, 167.54. Aussie, 0.9384. India rupee, 59.335. But we know the central bank has been intervening. South Korean won, 1016.35. This is a multi-year high. Rial, 222.20. Egyptian pound steady now at 714.92, and the rand at 1069.79. I'll put up a 3-month chart of the dollar index. You can see we're pressing at the top of the range here. This is really a story, an inverse story of euro weakness coming into giving strength to the dollar index. Euro dollar, I'll put up a 3-month chart, 135.30. And apparently, the cost of money in the European system much lower yesterday. Kenya's digital payment service is lapping Bitcoin many times over. It's from Business Insider, and you can see that for all the noise Bitcoin got, it got very little traction when you compare it to something like M-Pesa. Gold a little bit higher at 1261.865, touched 1263.66 yesterday, which was the highest level since May the 28th. Remember, it fell to 1240.73 on June 3rd, which was the lowest since January the 31st. Crude oil back towards the highs, 104.48. It's Chinese buying that has been lifting prices. Bloomberg have caught up with the story. China is hoarding crude at the fastest pace in at least a decade, shielding itself from supply disruptions and helping keep prices above $100 a barrel. Country imported a record volume in April as it emulates steps taken by the US in the 70s to create a strategic petroleum reserve. Chinese President Xi Jinping is building stockpiles as his nation clashes with Vietnam over resources in the South China Sea and faces potential risks to oil sales from Russia, Africa, and the Middle East because of sanctions and violence. Purchases are helping drive oil prices higher, according to Barclays Citigroup Nomura. China's thirst for crude grows with the expansion of its emergency stockpiles and refining. The IEA estimates that the Asian nation is poised to surpass the US as the world's largest oil consumer by 2030. This panicked stockpiling is one of the ways that geopolitical tensions can actually tighten physical oil markets, Seth Keinman. WTI has gained about 9% over the past year. Going back to that World Bank economic update, they updated about Sub-Saharan Africa, and I'll just read you what they said. In Sub-Saharan Africa, strong domestic demand underpinned GDP growth of 4.7% in 2013, up from 3.7% the previous year. The regional aggregate was depressed by weak 1.9% growth in South Africa due to structural bottlenecks, tense labour relations, and low consumer and investor confidence. Excluding South Africa, average regional GDP growth was 6% in 2013. Fiscal and current account deficits widened across the region, reflecting high government spending, falling commodity prices, and strong import growth. Medium-term prospects for the region remain favourable, with GDP growth projected to remain broadly stable at 4.7% in 2014, before rising moderately to 5.1% in each of 2015 and 2016, supported by firming external demand and investments in natural resources, infrastructure, and agricultural production. Growth is expected to be particularly strong in East Africa, increasingly supported by FDI flows into offshore natural gas resources in Tanzania and the onset of oil production in Uganda and Kenya. Although growth will remain subdued in South Africa, it will pick up modestly in Angola and remain robust in Nigeria. East African bloc threatens South Sudan's feuding sides with sanctions. On Tuesday, leaders from the IGAD, which is the Intergovernmental Agency for Development, the East African bloc brokering peace talks, held discussions with both Kiir and Machar to push for an end to fighting. Ahead of negotiations on the formation of a transitional government, Kiir and Machar, agreed fully to commit themselves to the already signed agreements and to complete all negotiations within the coming 60 days, and then establish a transitional government of national unity. That's the Ethiopian Prime Minister. If they don't abide to this agreement, IGAD as an organization will act to implement peace in South Sudan. On that, we have different options, including sanctions and other punitive actions as well, added Hailemariam. Mahbub Malim, who was once a guest on Mindspeak, was aggressive in comments he made. He said Salva Kiir and rebel leader Riek Machar was stupid if they thought they could win on the battlefield. Comments came just hours before Kiir and Machar worked to hold a rare face-to-face meeting in Addis Ababa. Nobody else is to blame other than the parties themselves, said Malim. And then if we want to apportion blame, it's theirs. I think sometimes they thought they could win on the ground militarily, something which is very stupid. It will be much more tangible, much more concrete, much tougher than it has been. This is something that must come to an end. There is no two ways about it. The South African all-share rallied 1.2% yesterday to close at a fresh record high above 50,000 and is up 9.695% this year. Dollar Rand still holding below the 1070 level, and I think it will head back towards that 1030 level we saw recently. Egyptian Pound 715, that's after a sharp slide, has stabilized around these levels. The Egyptian stock market down 0.31% yesterday, but remains up 26.3196% this year. The Nigerian all shares up 0.4645% in 2014 and had a strong run in the last few weeks. I found this quote in CNN: "The license plates on our police escorts, land cruisers, read Borno State, home of peace." Saying before we came to Lake Chad, we'd met 2 informants in Nigeria who live among Boko Haram members and know the terrorist organization's tactics better than most. We asked them what the group has planned for the kidnapped schoolgirls. They will use them to negotiate with the government about those of their members that have been detained by the government, one tells us, or they will use them as human shields. The Ghana Stock Exchange is up 10.0699% this year. The Ghana Ministry says that the central bank is not printing money to pay debt, which was an accusation that Fitch had made. Interesting piece on Wall Street Journal about how Kenya and Nigeria stand out for growth potential. Talking about robust population growth, saying that Nigerian GDP reached 510 billion in 2013. A chunky 190 billion more than South Africa's slow-growing economy. We view Nigeria and Kenya as 2 of the most attractive frontier markets over the next 5 years. Macroeconomic and demographic drivers of both countries are extremely compelling. East African energy boom investments take focus in budgets. Kenya, Uganda, Tanzania plan to allocate money in their annual budgets to spur investment in infrastructure to exploit oil and natural gas from deposits that companies, including Tullow Oil, have found. Ugandan and Kenyan oil discoveries made in 2006 and 2012 and new gas finds off the coast of Tanzania boosted reserves to as much as 46 trillion cubic feet, have seen East Africa become a frontier for petroleum exploration. The three countries, along with Rwanda, all members of the EAC, will tomorrow present their budget statements for the financial year starting July 1st. Higher spending on infrastructure may require governments to boost borrowing. Kenya plans to sell an inaugural eurobond this month to raise as much as $2 billion for infrastructure. Tanzania may sell its first sovereign debt in 2014-2015. East African budgets will be closely watched for attempts at fiscal consolidation and hydrocarbons discoveries across the region, said Razia Khan. Talking about the Lamu port, talking about the refinery in Uganda, and Tanzania's $1.23 billion Machar gas pipeline. The IMF expects Kenya's economy to expand by 6.3% this year. That's not going to happen. Tanzania 7.2%, Uganda 6.4%, Rwanda 7.5%. British oil company SOCO agrees to cease operations in Congo's Virunga National Park. SOCO has agreed to end its controversial operations in Virunga following a campaign by environmentalists who warned of devastating consequences if drilling in the area proceeded. SOCO is listed on the London Stock Exchange, had revenues of £360 million last year, reached an agreement with the conservation group WWF to end exploratory work in the DRC's Virunga National Park, classified as a World Heritage Site by UNESCO. The oil and gas company was awarded permission to explore for oil in an area known as Block V, overlapping the Virunga National Park. And this was all created by Human Rights Report, which I quoted previously, but this linked on rich wrap-ups. DR Congo investigate attacks on oil project critics, and of course the attack not too long ago, Mr. de Merode, who is a Belgian who looks after that park and whom I met, Bart Ouvries, and was a very articulate gentleman, very passionate, and I'm glad to see he's making a good recovery. Kenya prepares to join Africa's budding eurobond crowd. This is an article at Institution Investor. I couldn't copy and paste. The link is there, but essentially it's talking about the eurobond. Centum reported a full-year profit after tax acceleration of 21.761%. Pretty strong results, to be honest. Full-year investment income up 25%. Operating and admin costs up 53%. Finance costs were largely in line. Share of associated profits up. Profit before tax up 23.491%. Profit after tax up 21.761%. No dividend. They have a policy of not paying a dividend, and the earnings per share were up 20.42%. Trades on a trailing P of 8.865. Reported a 6.8 billion shilling increase in net worth. Our exposure to private equity and real estate and infrastructure has increased from 59% to 83% during the strategy period. 19% for portfolios deployed outside Kenya. They've largely exited the listed markets. Portfolios gaining traction. It's inexpensive on a PE basis. Unidentified gunman shot dead Muslim cleric Sheikh Idris Muhammad, who was known to oppose militant Islamists in the city of Mombasa. Preacher was killed while walking to a mosque in the Likoni suburb for prayers at about 5 a.m. Police are hunting for suspects they believe wanted to stop Muhammad from being reinstated as head of the Sakina Mosque in Mombasa after he was ousted from the post by young extremists. We suspect the radicals opposed to him being put in that position are behind this isolated incident. Muslim youth stormed the Sakina Mosque in November and chased off Muhammad, who was also chairman of the Council of Imams and Preachers of Kenya. I put up a photograph of the Sakina Mosque. I put up a photograph of Mombasa Island seen from English Point. And it remains a tinderbox, I'm afraid. The Kenya shilling a little bit softer, 87.18. Nairobi All Share up 9.945% this year, 1.591% below a record closing high set on the 12th of May. NSE 20 is down 1.989% in 2014 at a 3.5-month low. That video we did with Captain Koki Mutungi is linked on Rich Wrap-Ups. I wrote that piece over the weekend, Barbarians at the Gates. The money is the easy part. And I quoted Al Pacino, "You short a couple of mil, I go on the street for you, make some moves, mill here, mill there, you've got it." My point was that actually getting the money these days is a lot easier. It's the execution that's going to be key. RVR Bags Vivo Oil whole deal. This will be good news for them. Apparently, Vivo Energy's chief executive saying we're doing this because there's been an improvement in rail transport compared to the past. I'll put up a photograph from Mombasa Nairobi Railway. The All Share rallied 0.4546% yesterday. As I said, it's up 9.9451% in 2014, within 1.59% of a record high. The All Share, whilst it's up 9.9451%, compares to the NSE 20, which is down 1.98% over the same period. Equity turnover yesterday was vigorous, big caps dominating. I think liquidity from the issue of the eurobond will prove a rising tide from here on in. Neither Williams nor Capchoria traded yesterday, but I previously analysed the earnings. Safaricom unchanged at 12.85, but the competitor landscape is much more fluid than it's been for some time. Uchumi rebounded 3.15% to close at 13.10. The share price has become dislocated and viciously oversold, and at these sorts of prices I would have thought it's a very tasty takeover target. Equity Bank rallied 2.976% to close at a record closing high of 43.25. Posted a 40.65 return year to date, with the acceleration in that return happening after the release of the MVNO news. KCB, most actively traded share at the Securities Exchange firm, 0.505% to close at 49.75. Missed closing at 50 by the smallest allowable margin, but obviously we'll head through there. Standard Chartered, very cheap share, ticked 0.974% higher to close at 311. And it did produce some very good first quarter results, so I'm expecting a better performance. Centum saw slight profit taking yesterday after the release of those earnings. Mumia Sugar rebounded on the news that the CEO and CFO had been asked to leave. And the very weak part of our market is KPLC and Kengen, the electricity company, as they remain very soft. And in KPLC's case, it's down 4.59% in 2014. Kengen has slumped at 29.52%. Once again, I'm grateful that you stopped by. Thank you.